Ever stop and wonder how the world's energy actually gets from a gas field in, say, Texas, all the way to a power plant in Tokyo, and how that deal stays locked in for 25 years? Well, it's not just a handshake. It's a massive, multi-billion-dollar bet on the future. And it's all held together by one of the most complex contracts on the planet. So today, let's crack open the anatomy of this mega deal.
Okay, look at this number, $20 billion. And to be clear, that's not the value of the whole 25-year deal. Nope, that's just the price tag to build one single liquefaction plant.
It's basically one giant factory that takes natural gas and super chills it into a liquid so it can be shipped around the world. For the energy companies behind these things, this is just a staggering amount of money to spend up front, years before they can even think about selling a single molecule of gas.
So that brings up the big question, right? How on earth do you convince banks to loan you that kind of cash? How do you build a deal that can survive market crashes, wars, and everything else for a quarter of a century? You need a very, very special kind of rulebook.
And that brings us to the LNG Sale and Purchase Agreement, or as everyone in the biz calls it, the SPA. Now, I want you to forget about dusty old legal documents. Think of this thing as the playbook for a super high-stakes strategic game. The prize, global energy security, and the players are betting trillions.
See, at its very core, the entire purpose of the SBA is to answer one question over and over again. Who takes the risk? It painstakingly carves up every single danger you can imagine, from a gas field running dry to wild price swings, and assigns it to either the seller who makes the gas or the buyer who needs it.
So let's start by putting ourselves in the seller's shoes. They're the ones building that $20 billion plant. They are taking on all the initial risk, and they have two massive worries that keep them up at night.
First, there's production risk. What if their gas field isn't the jackpot they thought it was? Well, too bad. The contract says they have to deliver the gas they promised, even if it means they have to go out and buy it from a competitor, likely at a huge loss. And second, what about shipping? We're not talking about any old boat here. These are basically giant floating thermoses, and a whole lot can go wrong on a month-long trip across the ocean.
Now, to solve that shipping problem, the SBA uses one of two really simple but powerful terms. If it's a free-on-board or FOB deal, the risk literally transfers to the buyer the second the LNG is on their ship. It's their ship, their problem. But in a delivered X ship or DES deal, the seller is on the hook for the entire journey, right up until that ship is safely docked. That one little choice completely flips who carries the burden for the whole voyage. Okay, so the seller has production and shipping risk. But to get that $20 billion from the bank, they have to get rid of the biggest risk of all. What if the buyer just stops buying? I mean, the entire project's financing depends on killing that risk, and it all comes down to one single, totally non-negotiable clause.
It's called take or pay, and it is the absolute heart and soul of the LNG SPA. It says the buyer must pay for, let's say, 90% of the gas they agree to buy each year, even if their power plants are all shut down and they don't actually need it. They have two choices: take the gas or pay for it anyway.
I mean, just think about that commitment from the buyer's side. They are legally locked in to pay for this massive chunk of gas year after year, no matter what happens in their own country. It's a huge risk for the buyer, for sure, but it's the ironclad guarantee the seller needs to get the project financed in the first place.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the take-or-pay clause is what shifts all of that demand risk away from the seller and onto the buyer. It guarantees that revenue stream, which lets them pay back those gigantic loans. It's the bedrock the whole project is built on. So we've figured out who carries the risk for production and for demand. But what about the biggest wild card of them all? The price. How do you set a fair price for something for 25 years when markets can go absolutely nuts overnight? Well, the SBA has a really clever way to manage this shared gamble.
See, instead of a fixed price, they use a formula. In Asia, a lot of the time it's linked to the price of crude oil. They'll take a big global benchmark, like Brent crude, and they multiply it by a percentage that they negotiate called the slope. So if oil is at $100 and the slope is 12%, then your LNG price is $12. Simple as that. This lets the gas price float along with the wider energy market instead of being stuck in the past.
But what happens if oil prices go totally insane and shoot up to $200? Or what if they crash down to $20? To stop either side from getting wiped out, the contract has this great safety mechanism called an S-curve, and it really is a risk-sharing tool. It puts a ceiling on the price, which protects the buyer from crazy high costs, and it puts a floor on the price, which protects the seller's revenue. It keeps the whole deal alive no matter how wild the market gets.
Look, any relationship that lasts 25 years is going to hit a few bumps in the road. It's just guaranteed. So what happens when the totally unexpected happens? Well, the final layers of the SPA are all about setting the ground rules for when things go sideways.
You can think of these clauses as the deal's safety net. You've got force majeure, which basically excuses a party if an act of God, like a massive hurricane, destroys their plant. Then there are destination clauses, which decide if the buyer is allowed to turn around and resell their cargo to someone else. And this one's huge. If there's a major fight, the contract says you don't go to local courts. Instead, you go to a neutral referee through international arbitration in a city like London or Singapore.
And that point about destination? That is one of the biggest battlegrounds in LNG deals today. The old school contracts were super strict, no resale. But a lot of the newer contracts, especially out of the US, give buyers the flexibility to send a cargo to a hotter market and make some extra cash, as long as they share a cut of that profit with the original seller.
So when you put it all together, you can really see the grand bargain of the LNG SPA. The risk of crazy price swings, that gets shared. The risk that nobody wants the gas, that falls right on the buyer, thanks to take or pay. And meanwhile, the seller is on the hook for actually producing the stuff and sometimes for shipping it. Every major risk is tracked down and given a home. It's a complex puzzle, but it creates this really elegant balance.
It might just look like a ridiculously long contract, but the SPA is the engine that makes these multi-billion-dollar energy projects actually happen. It creates the certainty that everyone needs to invest for decades. So the next time you hear about a major energy deal, you'll know about the intricate web of rules holding it all together, just trying to keep the lights on, which leads to the real question. In a world that's constantly hit with energy shocks, could this complex, rigid contract actually be the unsung hero of global stability?